Hello everybody, and welcome to another Dwarf Fortress Adventure Mode tutorial. In this video, we're going to be talking about melee combat basics. We're going to be talking about combat stances, and we're going to be talking about the different types of attacks, and their positives and negatives. We're also going to be discussing armor, and disarming, and regaining of weapons, if you have lost it. This isn't going to be a complete guide on combat, as directional indicators are not currently in the beta. I will be looking into doing a ranged combat basics guide, and then in the future, a complete combat guide talking about everything that I possibly can in adventure mode combat. So as you can see, I'm already in a combat encounter. Our dwarf here, Urist, is fighting with his horse, Kumil, against a group of dingo men that were encountered in some untamed wilds. The dingo men are not armed, so it hasn't been the fairest of fights, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity for me to show you how the different attacks work. The first menu I would like to draw your attention to is down here. Set combat options. These can be changed by clicking on the icons or by hitting the letter A on the keyboard. This allows you to choose a default attack according to opponent, which isn't super clear, so let's elaborate a little bit. When it's set to default, charging only happens based on the size difference between you and the enemy. If the opponent is larger than you, and you decide to bump attack by moving the character into the enemy or right-clicking on the enemy, you're more likely to charge if the enemy unit is smaller than you. Because charging something that is 18 feet tall, or significantly taller than the dwarf, or whatever your player character is, could be a rather large risk to your own safety, and also could cause you to get instantly killed, as damage can be quite lethal if they get a lucky hit. Leaving this on default is probably optimal for beginner players, but let's roll through the other options. If we set the default attack to wrestling move, then when we bump attack, the dwarf is going to prioritize grappling, meaning they are going to try and grab, bite, scratch, throw, and choke. While this can be quite useful in niche situations, when it comes to basic combat, especially against an armed foe, it can be quite dangerous, especially if the enemy is armed and you are not, or if they have large claws or some sort of animalistic abilities. If we set the default to charging strike, this will default you to always charging the enemy. If you're fighting against a group of smaller enemies and looking to bump attack, this might not be a bad idea, as you will barrel directly towards them every opportunity you get. And while bump attacking, your dwarf is going to simply smack into the enemy and make sure that they do as much default damage as possible. However, if you find yourself in a combat situation with a giant jaguar and you are a small dwarf, well, let's just say you'll probably bounce off his shins and get clawed to death. And if you set the default to strike, this is the most optimal situation against a larger enemy or an enemy that is armed. But personally, even when I'm bump attacking, I leave this on default. Next, we have dodge preferences. These can be changed by pressing the letter D on the keyboard. The first option is move around. This means that when you're bump attacking, your dwarf is going to automatically dodge out of the way of potentially lethal attacks, meaning it might cancel your order and appear as though the dwarf is just jumping around the map at random. Especially without any directional indicators, this can make combat quite confusing visually. However, I do assure you, they're doing their best to keep their neck on their head. The second option under dodge preferences is do not move from the current tile when dodging, even if it means being struck. Perhaps you're standing on a one-tiled wide beam on the top of a very large wall. Then you might want to be very careful about getting hit, and maybe it's worth taking the hit to avoid falling into a volcano, just as an example. And lastly, we have charge defense. This is what your character is going to do when the opponent is charging. So default is according to opponent, based on the size of the enemy. And this is similar to the dodge preference. So if you're being charged by an enemy and you're in an open field, probably not a bad idea to just simply leave it on default, or set it to dodge away from charging opponents, which will cause your character to vault out of the way and potentially into harm's way if you're in an area where there is a lot of potential danger around. Or you could attempt to stop the charging opponents, which might not be a bad idea if the enemy is small, like these dingo people, but probably would be a bad idea if the enemy is large. Now, all of this applies directly to bump attacking. What is bump attacking? Well, that's when you either right-click an enemy and click attack, like that, or when you manually move directly into an enemy using either the keyboard or clicking. However, we are allowed to be significantly more detailed in our combat in Dwarf Fortress. We have this handy button down here. And as you can see, the combat log is going on up here, and our horse is kicking some serious dingo butt. By either hitting the capital A hotkey, Shift A, or by clicking the sword down here, we can open up this menu. This gives you a little bit of information of every single enemy that is currently in combat with you, and either moving, regaining balance, attacking you, recovering from an attack, or just within range where you can hit them. These dingo people have had a pretty rough time of it, so a lot of them are already unconscious. This dingo is moving to the southeast, meaning if I try and strike, unless I do a very quick strike, which I'll talk about in a second, I'm likely to miss. These two dingoes are not currently in combat with me, or aiming to attack me. We're going to focus on this dingo, who is currently recovering from attacking my horse and regaining their balance, meaning we're more likely to have an optimal hit. Now we have two options. We can strike and we can wrestle. We're gonna start off with striking and explain that first, and then we'll talk a little bit about wrestling. Wrestling deserves its own tutorial as it's quite a complicated system, and is best just played around with lightly if you are inexperienced with adventure mode. When you click on strike, you see this menu. Now, don't worry, it's not actually that complicated. It might seem quite daunting, and there's a huge list, but it gets a lot simpler once you realize that a lot of this list is just fingers and toes. If an option is marked with an exclamation point, which you can see here and here, as well as a couple more a little further down, these are referred to as an attack of opportunity. An attack of opportunity is a very specific hit that you are very likely to do quite a considerable amount of damage with. If you're going to go for an attack of opportunity, it's best to find one that seems relatively optimal. Some options are marked with pluses and others are marked with minuses. These indicate that your hits will be better or worse. The green pluses and the very difficult to discern brighter green and turquoise pluses mean the attack will be better. Whereas the negative symbols, the minuses or the hyphens, that come in both red and orange colors are less effective. The rest of it is quite self-explanatory. It explains whether or not it will be an easy strike, a normal strike, an easier strike, a tricky strike, a difficult strike, or even impossible, meaning you can't currently hit them. However, impossibles can have an attack of opportunity available. As an example here, this impossible strike has a fairly solid chance of doing damage, but I can't hit them. However, we have an attack of opportunity. So if I click on this, our attack of opportunity is an easier, slow hit, but it will hit directly. And because there's no other threats to us right now, this might actually be relatively optimal. We can also scroll down on this side to see the other options. We are not currently wielding a weapon or a shield. Kicking them with our right foot for the direct hit is probably optimal. Now we have several other settings that we can tweak here. Quick attacks will speed up the speed of the hit. However, will do less damage, which might actually not be a bad decision for this nose attack with our foot, as it'll allow us to recover quicker. But because we're not under threat, we could go with a heavy attack. A heavy attack will slow everything down. Because the character is currently recovering from a strike on my horse, and also unbalanced, this might be the optimal situation. If we need something heavy that also goes quickly when we're not in threat, we could use a wild attack, which is a fast strike with slow recovery, meaning we'll hit hard, it'll be inaccurate, it'll unbalance us, but it'll be fast. Think of it like an act of desperation. We could also use a precise attack, which is one of my favorites. However, precise attacks are very slow. I find these to be particularly good for taking somebody out or if a target is distracted. And then lastly, multi-attack. This is a toggle on or off. If we turn on one of these attacks up here, we can then turn on multi-attack, allowing us to do the same attack twice after a second turn. It's actually quite a simple system that has a lot in common with Fallout's VATS, if you're at all familiar with that. So we're going to go with a double quick strike to destabilize this character so they don't hit my horse again. It should also be worth noting if you're playing on keyboard, all of the hotkeys are listed right next to the different abilities. So we've now queued up the attack, and we can see this little unfinished window up here. It wants us to press period or comma to act. So on the keyboard, I will now press period. That is our first hit. I maintain possession of the Rodim. I gained my spear back, and I kicked the dingo woman in the nose from behind with your right foot, and the injured part explodes into gore. And then I kicked the dingo woman in the upper arm, as the nose was gone, and I couldn't attack the same thing, but it was effective. In fact, the part was smashed. into an unrecognizable mass. It appears another one has bit my horse a few times. We're gonna have to teach it a lesson. Seems like the horse won in the end, though. So while you're attacking, especially with something like a spear, which is my current weapon of choice, it is an artifact spear, so it's not visible in my hand, but trust me, it is equipped right now. If somehow you lose possession of your spear, say you stab something particularly hard and it gets stuck in them, or something similar happens with a sword, or maybe it gets knocked out of your hand because you dropped it for some reason. Maybe you got knocked over by a larger foe. If you go down to your inventory screen and click on this, you can then scroll down through the inventory screen. If you click on your weapon of choice, in this case my spear, down at the bottom is a button that says Gain Possession. If you click that, you gain possession of your spear. If your weapon gets stuck in an enemy, you may need to move it out of the enemy before you can use it again. This is a good example of how to do that. This is a human maceman. They also happen to be a bandit. This is a goblin. He was our guide. We're going to move up towards this maceman. They are not asleep, which is, I guess, unfortunate for them, as they will see their last moments before their eyes. We're going to click on Strike or Wrestle, and I'm going to confirm. Now, this dwarf has some skill in dodging, meaning we can get out of the way of an attack if we need to. But first, we're going to look at wrestling very briefly and try and grab them with my shield hand. And if you scroll down here, you can actually see different types of armor. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're fighting against an enemy and you can't actually damage them, let's say you keep hitting them in the head and your weapon keeps bouncing off. Maybe you have a copper sword and they have an iron helmet. It might be pertinent to try and grab their helmet. In this case, we're going to try and grab their Morningstar. We grab the convex nose bridge human maceman by the iron Morningstar with the side of your iron shield. Their dot down here has turned to red, which means we're now in combat. They have yielded. I don't care. We're going to try and grab their Morningstar a second time. We grab it once again. Unfortunately, I'm not able to gain possession, but I hope that that was a decent example. We're now going to attempt to parry them, which I am skilled in. Parrying makes them stagger. The convex nose bridge human maceman strikes at you, but the shot is just barely parried by an iron short sword. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you would like to see more videos like this about Dwarf Fortress or Dwarf Fortress Adventure Mode, check out this YouTube channel. I have a large number of tutorials that just keep getting longer, apparently, even these quick ones. If you would like to see me live playing Adventure Mode or Dwarf Fortress or just Dwarf Fortress things in general, you can check out my streams at twitch.tv/BLINDIRL or over on YouTube on this very YouTube channel. If you have a specific tutorial that you've been looking for a while, let me know in the comments section. Take care of yourselves, say something nice to somebody, and I hope to see you in the next one.